Hi, I'm Dr. Chad Larson. Thanks for joining me in another episode of Keep It Real. Today I'm going to talk about a study that has come out of the Framingham Heart study. And the Framingham Heart study is really interesting, now multi-generational study that came out of Framingham, Massachusetts. And it started in 1948 with a little over 5,200 people. And now they've been tracking these original families now for generations, and they're on their third generation, and they've been just a treasure trove of information, medical information, epidemiological information, very interesting clinical information. So a lot of fantastic studies have come out of this original Framingham Heart study, and as time has gone on, they've been able to tap data from this pool of subjects that has grown very large over the past, 70 years or so. And so anyhow, this study was recently published in March, just last month of this year, in a study in a journal called the Journal of Clinical Lipidology. Journal of Clinical Lipidology. And lipidology is basically the study of fats and lipids. And so they focus on things like cholesterol and triglycerides. But this study also, a lot of other interesting information came out of the study. And so they used 2,500 subjects from this Framingham Heart initiative. And they basically wanted to study something pretty specific, is they wanted to evaluate the relationship of omega-3 fatty acids that comes under the umbrella of PUFAs, P-U-F-As, polyunsaturated fatty acids from EPA and DHA. These are the components in fish oil, oftentimes fish oil. It'll be other oils I'll mention in just a moment, but oftentimes fish oil. But let's just call it omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. And they want to measure this in people's bodies, particularly their red blood cells, and correlate that with mortality. And they wanted to see if there's a relationship between levels of RBC levels of these omega-3 fatty acids and causes of death. And basically what they figured out was there's an inverse relationship, meaning the higher the amount of RBC, omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids was the higher the amount of those, the lower the chance of all-cause mortality. And since this particular study, the Framingham Heart study, mostly focuses on heart disease, that's mostly where they found the correlation. But they also evaluated for other, let's call it non-heart disease causes of death, and there's a significant effect on that as well. So basically, in this inverse relationship, the higher the EPA and DHA of the omega-3 fatty acids, the significant lowering of all-cause mortality by about 35%. So there's a 35% decrease risk factor for all-cause mortality with the higher levels of omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids in their red blood cells. So as laboratory technology has gotten more sophisticated, we've been able to study the levels of certain nutrients in a much more sophisticated way. Instead of looking at it in plasma or serum, by looking at it in red blood cells, that's basically a way to evaluate the intracellular levels of these nutrients. And like lots of nutrients we've talked about in past episodes, lots of nutrients are mostly in cells. They're not floating around in the bloodstream. But for easeability and for lack of laboratory science, that was the only way that was able to be studied. But now that we're able to tap different cells to evaluate the levels of the nutrients there, it's given us some more specific clinical information that we can make some cool correlations. So that's what we learned in this study. We learned that the higher levels of omega-3s led to lower risk factor for all-cause mortality by at least 35%. And in this study, they didn't really go into the reasons why that happened, but the research in this study cited multiple other studies that looked at it from a similar vantage point, and they pulled together multiple studies to figure out why their results were as they were, that they have this inverse relationship. between these essential fatty acids and all-cause mortality. And when we talk about omega-3 fatty acids, we call them essential fatty acids. In medicine, when we talk about the word essential, like it's an essential amino acid or an essential nutrient, what that means is that the body doesn't make it and you can't live without it. So guess what? You have to get it from an outside source. We've talked about magnesium in the past and how a recent study showed that 75% of diets in the US are deficient in magnesium, and we have to get this amount of magnesium from our foods or supplements, but we have to get it from an outside source to really maximize the needs that the body has. Well, same thing is similar with these essential fatty acids, these omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. And so they put together with other studies why they think this happens. Why does higher amounts, or let's say it this way, the higher the levels of these omega-3 fatty acids, the lower the cause of early death, basically. And so they wanted to put together some ideas of why that might be. One of them is that when omega-3 fatty acids are higher, triglycerides are lower. And that might seem kind of counterintuitive because we know triglycerides are basically fat in the blood, and omega-3 fatty acids are fat as well. So why would that be? But it's all about the liver's production of these triglycerides are affected, and different other blood components are affected. And so what they found out is one of the possible reasons why a higher amount of omega-3 fatty acids is healthier, because overall triglyceride levels go down. One thing we know is as triglycerides levels go down, so does blood pressure. As blood pressure goes down, that is a major risk factor, or less of a risk factor, for cardiovascular disease. High blood pressure is a significant risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So if we can bring the blood pressure down, that can really decrease the chance of having heart disease. Another thing, if we can get better blood flow through the blood vessels by decreasing platelet aggregation. Platelet aggregation is basically where platelets start to pile up. If these platelets, these blood components, pile up because there's too many and the blood is too sluggish, that really increases the chance of sluggish blood, of blood flow not flowing, increased blood pressure, and increase the chance of a clot forming. So that's another thing that these omega-3 fatty acids do, is they decrease platelet aggregation. When platelet aggregation goes down, blood pressure improves, oftentimes heart rate goes down. We know heart rate also can be an independent risk factor for cardiovascular issues. So if we can improve heart rate, then that can really improve the overall function of the circulatory system. And one of the ways that overall mortality decreases, and we talked about this concept many times, is by decreasing inflammation and in inflammatory markers that we can actually measure on a blood test. And we know that when these omega-3 fatty acids go up, they are a major sort of natural anti-inflammatory. They're at least the building blocks for our body's own natural anti-inflammatory system. So if we can maximize their levels, that can really decrease the chance of having these elevated inflammatory markers. And like we talked about last time, we talked about how a particular nutrient called coenzyme Q10, which is made in all of our cells, when they took this group of people and they split them into two different groups. They gave one group coenzyme Q10 and the other group a placebo, which means just a fake pill. And then they did a washout period for 2 weeks after that initial 6 weeks, and then they switched the groups, and then they evaluated the integrity of their blood vessels, and they found that just in 6 weeks that being on this certain type of coenzyme Q10 helped to significantly improve their endothelial integrity. Remember, the endothelium is that inner portion of the blood vessels, and this is where hardening of their arteries starts, and this is really where heart disease starts. So if we can improve that endothelial function, we talked about last time with coenzyme Q10, this time we know that omega-3 fatty acids do that as well. So when we improve this endothelial function, we get better blood flow. blood pressure goes down and blood just flows easier through the blood vessels because they're able to normally distend. And when blood vessels are able to open up and distend, then the blood can flow easier to the brain and all other parts of the body. Something else that was interesting from kind of a non-direct sort of circulation standpoint is telomere length. They noticed also in another study that when a person has sufficient levels of omega-3 fatty acids, they have a decrease of shortening of their telomeres. The telomeres are kind of like the ends of our chromosomes, and they really determine the aging process. And so the faster that our telomeres shorten, the faster we're aging. And so again, through some pretty sophisticated studies, they've been able to evaluate the length of telomeres and evaluate certain things in the body to see if there's a correlation between certain things and shortening of telomeres. And we know that when omega-3 fatty acids are at sufficient levels, then there is a inhibition of this type of telomere shortening. So those are lots of things there, but that's the idea, is there's probably not a single cause that omega-3 fatty acids improves to decrease, decrease risk factor for all-cause mortality, but it's a combination of all these things. It's a multicellular, multifactorial effect that it has on the body, and that's why it has such a significant improvement on overall health. So again, very simple nutrient, and it's most sources, if you look up what has a high food source of omega-3 fatty acids, it's going to be pretty much a whole variety of fish, salmon, anchovies, mackerel, sardines. These are the high oily fishes, or the oils of those fish. You don't have to eat all those fish, but you can also get these oils in capsules or in liquid form that you could take as a supplement. There's also plant-based forms. Chia seeds are really high, are really high in omega-3 fatty acids. Flax seeds are really high in omega-3 fatty acids. Walnuts and walnut oil is really high in omega-3 fatty acids. Other plant-based sources are things like spinach and other greens and other sprouted vegetables are actually really high in these omega-3 fatty acids. So you don't have to just get it from fish. But fish, if you look at, a list of quantity of these kind of essential fatty acids, these omega-3 fatty acids, definitely the fish and seafood are really, really high. And you can get it from these other sources. You just might have to consume more of it. So a little food for thought, and hope you found it interesting. I'll keep reading the studies and bringing you the information. Until then, keep it real.